Are you feeling a little bit lost drafting Aetherdrift? Well, I've got some tips to help you out. I just got to top 100 Mythic, and although my initial drafts were a little bit rough, I learned a lot along the way. I do my best to try and make really densely packed guides for you, so subscribe if you want to see more, and tell me in the comments if you also hate the Frog Goddess. So to start off with big picture, the speed of this format is really strange. People assumed early on that this was going to be a very fast set, and don't get me wrong, those draws do exist. However, vehicles seem to lead to board stalls very quickly. You can't attack into the overstated vehicle that they play, and they might be too worried to risk their vehicle because it's the only thing holding back the tide of all your other creatures. So it becomes about chipping away with evasive creatures like flying, unblockable, trample, and this can lead to some crazy board states where both players have just lost track of everything and are too scared to attack anymore. Because of this, the stocks of cards that can help you either win board stalls or generate late game card advantage are higher than maybe we expected. The early data and vibes show that green, blue, and black are doing best overall, followed by red and then finally white. Some of the green commons have really crazy win rates, so if you can get into green early without being cut, then it's probably a safe bet. I'm going to dig into some specific cards that you should pay attention to. First thing is secret split cards that you may not realize are only really for one or two archetypes. Fang Druid Summoner is only really for black-green and white-green due to the uncommon legendary targets that it has. Tutoring out the octopus or the lizard is just not really what this card wants to be doing, don't bother. Back on Track is very clearly great in black-green where you're cycling big creatures in the graveyard early so you can reanimate them ahead of time, but it's the only thing you want to play and you don't really want to play it for value in other decks. Pothole Mole is also great in black-green and enables 3-color decks quite well, but it's quite slow and grindy in a way that doesn't suit the other 2-color green decks. So keep that in mind when you're picking it. Beast Rider Vanguard is very good in blue-green and again 3-color controlling decks, because if you've got things you can do by holding up your mana other than activating it, then it makes it harder for the opponent to know what's going on. Spectral Interference is also good in similar decks because the more things you can threaten to be doing at instant speed, the harder it is for them to know that you have a counterspell, meaning it can get something really juicy. And Ticket Tortoise is very solid in the decks that care about artifacts, aka blue-black and blue-white, but no other deck really wants it, and it does go very late. These next cards are just good in every single color pair for that color. Some of them are underrated, others are just appropriately rated. Glory Heath Lynx is just an amazing 2-drop, being able to help you survive against aggro but also generate card advantage if you're going for a more mid-range plan. It does a bit of everything. Broadcast Rambler is basically 2 bodies in 1 card and it can crew itself. One of those bodies is also evasive and it's 2 artifacts for decks that care about that as well. It does a lot of work for a common and is kind of underrated at the moment. Sundial is just an efficient body but also happens to be an artifact, also happens to have synergy with the legendary searching stuff. Into Blue, Ranger's Refueler is an exhaust ability that you don't need any other synergy to run. It's just great on its own. And if you happen to be able to get additional cards, it's just crazy. The format is slow enough that there's enough time to make use of the card advantage you get from stock up, and this card is also very underrated right now. Spike Show Harrier is good at slowing down the game, but it's also good at tempoing out your opponent. People are picking this high, and they're right to do so. Keen Buccaneer is one of the best blue commons. It doesn't look very impressive. You see a 2-3 for 3 and you're like, eh. But again, with games going a bit longer, exhaust is very relevant. Being able to block something early, but also threaten to attack and then crew stuff, all very useful. Flood the Engine, similarly, doesn't look very impressive, but it just deals with everything. There's also one of the few cards that deals with the bloody Frog God. Into Black, we have another kind of unassuming looking card, Wreckage Wickerfolk, but it just does everything that every deck wants. If you're playing an aggressive deck, it's a cheap, evasive creature. If you're playing control, then it is a well-statted blocker. If you're playing artifacts, it's an artifact. And if you like to keep risky hands, then it has Surveil too. Grimbauble is cheap enough you can play it in both aggressive decks and slower decks. Maximum Overdrive is just a very efficient trick. And again, it's cheap enough that you can play it in both aggro and mid-range. And at the moment, this card is quite underrated. Engine Rat is interestingly useful in every deck type. It's less useful in aggressive decks, even though it does help you to trigger things like start the engines. It is more happy in the mid-range shells where it's buying time and you maybe get to activate its ability. And similarly, Spin Out is good in every black deck, but it's a bit weaker in aggro because it's quite expensive for removal. However, just being able to deal with vehicles without having to think about it is a really nice upside. Thunderhead Gunner was a bit of a surprise for me. I assumed this would only be good in very specific types of decks like controlling red decks, but apparently it's just decent in everything. Reach is very relevant in these board stalls to help extend the game, and when you extend the game, then the ability of discarding and looting for better cards becomes amazing. And because not enough decks are reliably closing the game out early, this effect becomes useful for every deck. Grease Wrench Goblin looks like it's maybe just for all-in aggressive decks, but the exhaust ability really helps with hand manipulation, and just every deck wants that ability. It's also very efficiently statted. And Green Stampeding Scurryfoot is just an amazing rate. Opponents can't really afford to use removal on this early, because there's too many big things Green could play that they have to deal with. So they just have to suck up the fact that you're going to have a 2/2 and a 3/3 early, and they're going to somehow have to handle that. Run Over is just extremely efficient removal. It doesn't pump the thing that is fighting, but it's instant speed, and it can sometimes cost 1 instead of 2. And of course, Green just has loads of big bodies to target. Here are some of the gold cards that would really pull you into that color combination because of how strong they are. Haunt the Network is an amazing card at stabilizing games and stealing them. I've definitely robbed a couple of games with this card, and I think it's by far the best payoff for being in artifacts. Thundering Broodwagon just feels terrible to play against. It comes into play and destroys something very relevant, and then either, if they want to attack, it has Menace, and if they don't want to attack, it has Reach and is huge. Also, if they're green-black, they've probably got ways to bring this back from the graveyard after it dies, so they could be cycling it early if they need to as well. Veteran Beast Rider just makes combat horrific for the opponent. I guess I don't want to block because you might activate the ability and make all your guys bigger, but then if I don't block, well, you'll just untap them all and then you can block me. And finally, Sky Serpent Seeker is just great at all stages of the game. It's an evasive flyer, it's a blocker that trades up, and then you can even exhaust it for additional card advantage. And now for some cards that people are picking very highly, but maybe incorrectly so. Detention Chariot is a very good white card. However, people are picking it very highly initially because of its Oblivion Ring effect, but that puts you very firmly in white, and you may not want to be there. These 3 removal spells are very good in red, but again, they're often being taken pack 1, pick 1, pack 1, pick 2, and I'd say you probably want to be taking them a little bit later and trying to get into the green, blue, and black color pairs instead. In green, Elvish Refueler is amazing in the Teamer colors, but actively bad in the others. It's currently being picked really highly, and I think people are just running it without the synergy sometimes, but that's not worth it. Guidelight Optimizer is okay in blue-black, but not really good in any other deck, so if you want it, you should be really trying to wheel it and not taking it highly at all. Risen Necro Regent is a very powerful card that again people are taking very highly because they see it and they think Grave Titan. This needs a lot of work to pay off properly. You can only really play it in aggressive leaning decks with lots of Start Your Engine cards. You need this to come down and already be turned on. Because the format is a little bit slower, 3-color decks seem to be doing okay in certain conditions, mostly ones that involve green to help splash. I think generally if you're going to be playing 3-color without green, you're probably going to want multiple Night Markets and on-color dual lands. As I say, Night Market is a great card, and you're happy to play it in most decks. Marshall's Path Cruiser, if you want to be splashing, is one of the better ways to do it. Delaharp Bike is great if you're base green and you're splashing. I've also had success just playing it in 2-color decks, ramping into strong 5 and 6 drops. Starting Column is pretty weak fixing, but again, if you're all in on 3 or more colors, then it will do the job for you. And Point the Way is just kinda ass. Because if you're trying to ramp, you're probably not being aggressive enough to get high enough speed early enough to make this worth it. But as time goes on, I have a feeling that the format will get more and more into 3 and 4 color control suit decks. So it's something to keep in mind. So if you've been feeling a little bit lost, I hope this helps give you a better picture of where things are. And I'll be interested to see how the format develops over the coming weeks. If you've got any questions you want to ask, then hit me up in the comments, and I'll see you next time.